Everyone in town locks their doors before sunset, not after dark, not before bed, before the sun is fully down. It's not something anyone announces or enforces. There are no signs posted, no town meetings, no official warnings. It's just what people do at first. Visitors don't notice it. Then one evening, they glance down a street just as the sky starts to turn orange, and they see it happening all at once. Doors closing, deadbolts sliding into place, curtains being pulled tight, like a routine practiced too many times to question. During the day, the town feels almost welcoming. Front doors are left open while people clean or cook. Children run between houses. Neighbors stop to talk in driveways. Dogs nap in yards without fences. Nothing about the place feels dangerous. That's what makes the habit stand out so sharply once you notice it, because no one explains it just before sunset. The atmosphere changes. It's subtle at first. Conversations shorten. People check the sky more often. Porch chairs are moved closer to doors. Grocery bags are carried inside a little faster than necessary. Then, without any signal, it begins. One house locks up, then another, then the entire street. Visitors sometimes assume it's about crime. They ask polite questions. Is it not safe here at night? Did something happen? Locals smile and shrugged. They say things like, just a habit, old, routine, better safe than sorry. But they don't laugh, and they don't invite follow-up questions. The first person to notice how precise the habit was a delivery driver. He'd been coming through town every afternoon for weeks, dropping off packages, chatting briefly with residents. He noticed that around the same time every day, about 20 minutes before sunset, people stopped answering their doors, not ignoring them, preparing. One afternoon, he arrived early. The town was still open, doors unlocked, windows open, people outside. The next afternoon, he arrived 10 minutes later than usual, and the town was already closing. He stood on a porch, package in hand, listening as a lock clicked on the other side of the door. Not hurried, not panicked, deliberate. The driver waited. He assumed someone would open the door anyway. They didn't. Through the frosted glass, he saw a shadow pass. Then the porch light turned off. The sun was still visible over the trees. He left the package and walked back to his truck with a strange feeling in his chest. Not fear. Recognition, like he had arrived at the wrong time for something he didn't understand, new. Residents notice it eventually too, usually. Within the first week, they ask neighbors why everyone disappears so early. They ask if there's a curfew, ask if something happens at night. The answers are always the same. You'll get used to it. It's just how it's always been. Make sure you're inside before dark. Not warnings, instructions. The most unsettling part isn't that people lock their doors. It's how early they do it. The sun hasn't even set yet. Birds are still calling. The sky is still blue at the edges. Streetlights haven't come on, and yet the town is sealing itself in. One evening, a couple passing through decided to stop for dinner. They arrived just before sunset, hungry and tired from driving all day. The diner was still open, lights on, door unlocked. They ordered food and sat by the window as they ate. They noticed the street outside emptying. Cars pulled into driveways and didn't come back out. People walking dogs turned around early. A man jogging stopped abruptly, checked his watch, and ran home. The couple exchanged glances. They asked the waitress if the town had an event. That night, she shook her head. "Sun's almost down," she said. That was all by the time their food arrived. The street outside was empty by the time they finished eating. The diner door was locked. They hadn't seen the waitress lock it, but they heard it. The lights stayed on, the sign stayed lit, but the door didn't open. Again, the couple didn't ask why. They didn't need to. The quiet outside felt expectant. That's the thing about the habit. It doesn't feel like fear. It feels like timing, like the town has learned exactly when it's still safe to be visible, and when it's not. Long-time residents don't talk about when the habit started. They don't remember a first night. They don't remember a reason. They only remember being taught as children. They were told to be inside before the sun went down, to lock the door, to close the curtains, to stay away from windows. No explanation, just routine. And children raised in the town don't question it. They learn by watching adults move faster as the sky darkens, by noticing how voices lower, by feeling the way the air changes just before the last door clicks shut. They learn that outside becomes a different place after sunset, and that inside is where you stay. People who grow up there leave. Eventually, most do, but even years later, they find themselves locking doors earlier than necessary, closing blinds before dark, checking windows when the sky turns orange. They don't always know why. Their bodies remember, even when their minds don't. The habit doesn't protect against burglars. It doesn't stop storms. It doesn't make the town safer in any measurable way. It does one thing. It marks the moment when the town stops being available, because once the sun sets, something else is. The first family who asked why didn't mean to cause trouble. They weren't reckless. They weren't disrespectful. They weren't looking for a mystery. They were just new. The Halversons moved to town in early spring. Mark, his wife Leela, and their two children, Ohar, who was 9, and Noah, who had just turned 6. They bought a modest house near the edge of town, drawn by the quiet streets and the promise of a slower life at first. Everything felt perfect. Neighbors waved. People brought over food. The kids made friends quickly. And during the day, no one mentioned the habit. It was Mark who noticed it first. He worked from home and liked stepping outside in the evenings to clear his head. On their third night in town, he stood on the porch watching the sun sink lower, enjoying the stillness. That was when he noticed the doors up and down the street. People were going inside, not rushing, not panicking, just closing things down. He watched as his neighbor across the road pulled in lawn chairs, locked the front door, and closed the curtains, while still bright. Mark glanced at his watch. Sunset was still 20 minutes away. He shrugged it off. Small town quirks. The next evening, Leela noticed it too. She had been talking with a woman next door when the conversation suddenly ended mid-sentence. The woman glanced at the sky, smiled apologetically, and said, "I should get inside." She locked her door before Lila had crossed her own yard that night. The Halversons left their door unlocked. not to make a point, just because it felt unnecessary. Nothing happened. On the third evening, Emma asked a question. Why does everyone go inside early? Mark laughed and said maybe people liked their routines. But Emma frowned. They look scared, she said. That was the first moment Leela felt uneasy. Children notice things adults dismiss. A few days later, Mark asked someone directly. He mentioned it casually to a man at the hardware store while checking out. Why does everyone lock up before dark around here? He asked, smiling. The man paused. Not long, just long enough. Then he said, "You'll understand soon." The answer bothered Mark more than no answer would have. It wasn't vague, it was assumptive. The Halversons started noticing smaller details, how dogs were brought inside early, how window blinds closed at the same time each evening, how porch lights stayed off until full darkened, sometimes not at all, and how no one was ever outside after sunset, not walking, not driving, not even sitting on porches one evening. Noah stood at the front window just before sunset. "Someone's watching," he said quietly. Leela looked. The street was empty. She asked him what he meant. "Outside," he said. "They're waiting." She pulled him away from the window and closed the curtain without knowing why. Mark began to feel embarrassed by how much it bothered him. He told himself it was nothing, but then the questions started coming from neighbors, not accusations. Checks, getting settled okay. Doors working fine. You locking up early enough. The tone was gentle, but persistent. On their fifth night, Mark made a decision. He didn't tell anyone. He just wanted to understand as sunset approached. He left the front door unlocked. He sat in the living room, lights off, watching the sky darken through the window. Outside, the town closed, doors locked, curtains drawn, lights dimmed, and still nothing happened. At least, not right away. Just before the sun disappeared completely, there was a knock, not loud, not urgent. One knock, then another. Measured. Mark froze. The knock came again. 3 slow taps. Lila whispered his name from the hallway. The kids were upstairs. The street outside was empty. Mark approached the door quietly. He didn't open it. He looked through the peephole. There was no one. There the knocking stopped. The silence outside felt heavy, like the air was pressing inward. Mark locked the door. The lock clicked loudly in the quiet. House dot from the other side of the door. Something shifted, not footsteps, closer, like weight redistributing. Mark backed away. The knock did not return, but the feeling lingered. That night, Emma woke up screaming. She said someone had been standing outside her window, not knocking, not moving, just watching. The next morning, Mark asked a neighbor across the street if they'd heard anything unusual the night before. The neighbor avoided his eyes. "You left your door unlocked," he said. It wasn't a question. The Halversons locked their doors early after that. Didn't ask why again. But something had already changed. Because once you realize the habit is noticed, you stop thinking of it as tradition. You start thinking of it as permission. The knock came earlier the next evening. That was the detail Mark couldn't stop thinking about afterward. Not the sound itself, not the fear. The timing. Sunset was still nearly 30 minutes away when the first knock reached the Halverson house. Just one, soft enough that Mark almost ignored it. He was in the kitchen, rinsing a glass when the sound carried through the house. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It sounded deliberate, like someone knocking who knew they would be heard. Mark froze, hands still under running water. He waited. Nothing followed. He shut off the tap slowly and listened. The house was quiet, too quiet for that time of day. Outside, the neighborhood already felt empty, though the sun was still high enough to cast long shadows across the street. Mark walked to the front window and peeked through the blinds. No one stood on the porch, no one walked past the house. The street was empty. He checked the time. Early. The habit didn't start yet. Everyone knew that whatever happened after sunset wasn't supposed to begin. Before the sun was down, Mark told himself it must have been a bird or someone tapping the door by mistake. He stepped away. Then the second knock came. Harder, closer, right at the center of the door. Lila's voice drifted down from upstairs. "Did you hear that?" Mark didn't answer. His attention was fixed on the door. The knock wasn't random. It wasn't uneven. Whoever wore whatever was on the other side. Understood doors. Mark approached slowly. Every step felt louder than it should have. He placed his hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn it. The metal felt colder than expected. He leaned forward and pressed his eye to the PEEPHOLE. The porch light was off. The space beyond the glass was empty. A third knock came, higher this time, not where knuckles would normally land. Mark stepped back. Lila came down the stairs, then her face tight with concern. The kids hovered behind her, silent and wide-eyed. "No one's there," Mark whispered. He didn't know why he whispered. Glanced at the sky through the window. The sun was still visible. "That's not right," she said. Mark locked the deadbolt. The sound of the lock sliding into place echoed through the house on the other side of the door. Something shifted. Not footsteps. Weight. Redistributing. The pressure came next. Slow. Heavy. Something leaned against the door. Not pushing. Not testing strength. Resting Lila covered. Noah's mouth instinctively. Emma stared at the door. Unblinking, Mark felt his pulse. In his ears, he did not speak. He did not move. The pressure stayed for several long seconds. Then it lifted, but whatever had been there didn't leave. Instead, it moved. Mark heard it slide along the porch. Not walking, dragging. He realized with sudden clarity that it wasn't going away. It was circling windows. Lila whispered. Mark turned, just in time to hear a faint sound along the side of the house. Not scratching, not tapping fingertips, testing the siding. Emma screamed. "She's outside." She cried. "She's right there." They ran upstairs together. Mark reached the bedroom window just as Lila pulled the curtain closed. For a split second, he saw something in the glass reflection, a shape, standing too close. Emma was shaking uncontrollably. She smiled. She said again, but it wasn't right. Her mouth was too big. Mark held her tight. He didn't look back at the window outside. The house went completely still. No more knocks, no more movement, but the feeling remained, like something waiting patiently for permission it no longer needed to ask for. Minutes passed. The sun finally dipped below the trees. The last of the light drained from the street. Only then did the sensation fade. That night, no one slept well. Every sound felt amplified. Every creak felt intentional. The next morning, Mark went outside alone. He checked the porch at first. He saw nothing. Then he noticed. The wood, a handprint was pressed into the doorframe. Not dusty, not dirty. Indented, as if the wood had softened briefly under pressure. Mark didn't touch it. He stepped back across the street. The neighbor watched from behind a curtain. When Mark looked up, the curtain fell. Later that day, Mark showed the handprint to the neighbor. The man nodded once. "That's why we lock early," he said. Nothing more after that night. The knocks began appearing elsewhere in town, always before sunset, always brief, always measured, as if something was checking to see who remembered the habit and who didn't. People adjusted, doors locked earlier, curtains closed sooner. Children were pulled away from windows as the light faded, because whatever was outside had learned something new. It didn't need darkness anymore, it just needed time. After the knocks began, the town changed its behavior. Not dramatically, not openly, but noticeably. People stopped standing near windows as the sun went down. Curtains were drawn earlier than before. Porch lights, once used casually, were now avoided entirely. Light inside the house became something to control carefully, because light made you visible, and whatever was outside had learned where to look. The Halversons weren't the only ones who noticed it. Within days of the knock at their house, neighbors began reporting the same feeling. Not sounds, not movement, a presence. People would be inside their homes, doors locked, lights low. When they felt it, that sensation that someone is standing just beyond your field of view, except there was no someone there, was only outside. Leela experienced it first. She was in the living room just after sunset, folding laundry while the children played quietly nearby. The television was off. The house felt still. Then she felt eyes on her, not from inside, from the yard. She froze. Her hands stopped moving. She didn't turn toward the window. She didn't have to. She knew. The feeling wasn't urgent. It wasn't aggressive. It was patient, like something waiting to see if she would acknowledge it. Across town, other people felt the same thing at the same time. A man washing dishes paused, sensing movement just beyond the kitchen window. A woman feeding her dog felt the pressure of attention near the back door. A teenager scrolling on his phone slowly lowered it when the sense of being observed became unbearable. None of them saw anything that made it worse. When people did look, the watchers were never directly visible. Not clearly, they existed in reflections, in peripheral vision, in the wrongness of shadows where no shadows should fall. One woman swore she saw a face reflected in her microwave. Door not behind her, outside, standing in the yard, motionless, just beyond the reach of the porch light. When she turned, the yard was empty. Dogs began behaving strangely. They stopped barking, not because they were calm, because they were afraid. They would sit near doors and whine softly, refusing to go outside after sunset haven to relieve themselves. Some dogs pressed their bodies against walls, as far from windows as possible. Animals understood the timing better than people. Children noticed it next. They didn't have language for it. They just knew. They were being watched. Emma refused to sleep near the window anymore. She moved her bed against the far wall and piled pillows between herself and the glass. When Lila asked why, Emma said something that made her blood run cold. "They don't like it when you look back," she whispered. No one ever reported seeing the same watcher twice. Not the same face, not the same shape, but everyone described the same behavior, stillness, proximity, attention. One man in town tried to document it. He set up cameras outside his house, motion-activated, night vision, professionally installed. The first night, the cameras worked fine. The second night, they recorded nothing, no footage, no error messages, just gaps in time. On the third night, one camera activated briefly. The footage showed the front yard empty. Then the camera tilted, not falling, tilting, as if someone had adjusted it gently. The man removed the cameras. The next morning, he didn't try again. The presence never crossed thresholds. It never opened doors. It never tried to force entry. That was the unspoken relief, and also the unspoken terror, because it meant something else was happening. Whatever watched from outside wasn't trying to get in. It was waiting, learning routines, observing who moved, who watched, who forgot. People began to realize the habit wasn't about protection. It was about participation. Locking doors before sunset wasn't just safety, it was acknowledgement. It was a signal. We remember the boundary. The few people who didn't follow the habit anymore felt it. Immediately, a man who left his porch light on felt the presence linger longer. A woman who stood near her window too long felt the weight of attention intensify. Nothing happened, but the message was clear. The Halversons considered leaving. They talked about it late at night, voices low, children asleep, but something held them there. Not fear, understanding. Leaving wouldn't erase what they'd learnt. One night, just after sunset, Mark stood in the darkened living room and felt it again. The presence, closer than before, right outside the front window. He stayed, perfectly still. He didn't look, he didn't move. He waited minutes. Passed, the feeling slowly receded. Not gone, just satisfied. That was the moment Mark understood the truth. Whatever watched from outside didn't want entry. It wanted awareness. It wanted to know that the people inside knew it was there. And once that was confirmed, it moved on. The town never spoke about it openly, but the rules became stricter. Doors locked earlier, lights dimmer, windows avoided, because whatever stood outside after sunset was not alone.
After sunset, the town becomes something else. Not darker. Not quieter. Smaller. The streets don't empty because people are afraid to be outside. They empty because there is no reason to be. After sunset, nothing happens out there that involves people anymore. The Halversons learned this slowly. At first, they assumed whatever watched from outside would leave once darkness fully settled in. That the habit, locking doors before sunset, was meant to keep something from arriving too early. They were wrong. Darkness wasn't the beginning. It was the permission. After sunset, the town entered a different rhythm. Houses went still. Lights stayed low. Movement slowed to the bare minimum. People didn't wander from room to room. They didn't open refrigerators unless necessary. They didn't shower late. They didn't run water near windows. Sound carried differently after dark. It carried too well. Mark noticed it first when he dropped a spoon in the kitchen one night. The clatter echoed far longer than it should have. Not louder. Longer. As if the sound had nowhere to go but outward. Lila began whispering without realizing it. So did the kids. No one asked them to. Their bodies adjusted on their own. Outside, the town didn't sleep. It waited. People who stayed awake late described the same sensation. The feeling that something was happening outside even though nothing moved. No footsteps. No voices. No visible shapes. Just activity without motion. Some described it like pressure shifting between houses. Others said it felt like attention passing by, sliding from one home to the next, pausing briefly, then moving on. No one could explain how they knew. They just did. At night, the watchers didn't stand close anymore. They didn't need to. They were already aware of every door. Every window. Every light source. Children were the most sensitive to it. Emma began waking up at the same time every night. Not crying. Not screaming. Just sitting upright in bed, eyes open, listening. When Lila asked what she was hearing, Emma shook her head. "They're counting," she said. No one asked what she meant. One night, Noah broke the rules without meaning to. He got thirsty and wandered into the kitchen after dark. Lila heard him before she saw him. Bare feet on the floor. She froze. The air in the house felt different instantly. Thicker. As if something outside had noticed movement. Lila rushed forward and scooped Noah up, holding him tight. She didn't scold him. She didn't speak. She carried him back to bed and sat there until his breathing evened out. Only then did the pressure ease. After that, they created new rules. No moving after sunset unless necessary. No standing near windows. No unnecessary noise. The town didn't enforce these rules. They remembered them. Occasionally, someone broke them. A light left on too long. A door opened after dark. A voice raised in frustration. Those houses felt different afterward. Heavier. As if something lingered nearby longer than usual. No one ever reported an attack. No screams. No break-ins. No violence. That was what made it worse. Whatever happened after sunset didn't need to harm anyone. It was doing something else. People began noticing patterns. The watchers moved in slow routes. They revisited the same houses on the same nights. They lingered near homes where routines changed. They seemed curious when someone stayed awake later than usual. Mark realized something unsettling. The town wasn't being monitored randomly. It was being learned. After sunset, the town was quieter than a place at rest should be. Even the insects stopped some nights. The wind rarely moved. Trees didn't sway. It felt like the outside world had stepped back. Leaving space for something else. People who looked out windows after dark sometimes saw shapes. Not clearly. Just distortions. Like the air itself was bending. One man described it as silhouettes that didn't quite align with their shadows. Another said he saw reflections in glass that didn't match anything inside his house. No one tried to get a better look. The Halversons stopped checking the time at night. They didn't need to. They knew when sunset had passed. Their bodies felt it. The most disturbing part wasn't fear. It was acceptance. The town wasn't hiding. It was cooperating. Because after sunset, the town belonged to something else. And everyone who lived there understood the unspoken agreement. Stay inside. Stay quiet. Stay unseen. Not because you'll be punished if you don't. But because you will be noticed. The town never changed. That was what unsettled people the most, especially those who left and looked back years later, trying to understand what they had experienced. They expected something dramatic. They expected escalation, violence, disappearance. They expected an ending. But the town stayed exactly the same. Years passed, and nothing new happened. No attacks. No sirens. No warnings issued. Houses were repainted. Roofs were repaired. The diner changed ownership twice. Children grew up, graduated, and left for college. Life continued. During the day, the town looked like any other place that had simply learned to move at a slower pace. That was the deception. The habit never faded. Doors still locked before sunset. Curtains were still drawn early. Porches still emptied as the sky began to change color. It wasn't fear that drove it anymore. It was memory. New families moved in from time to time. They were always the same type, people looking for quiet, for safety, for a place that felt untouched by the noise of the outside world. They noticed the habit eventually. They always did. And when they asked about it, the answers were unchanged. It's just how things are. You'll get used to it. Best to be inside early. No urgency. No emotion. Just certainty. The Halversons stayed longer than they ever planned. Long enough that the rules stopped feeling strange and started feeling necessary. Mark adjusted his work schedule so he was always home before dusk. Lila developed routines that wrapped up the day early. Dinner was served sooner. Baths happened while the sun was still up. The children adapted without question. Emma stopped asking about faces at the windows. Noah stopped wandering at night. They didn't forget. They learned. That was how the town survived. Not by resisting. By remembering what not to do. People who broke the habit didn't disappear. That was a misconception outsiders had when they tried to make sense of it. No one vanished into the night. No one was dragged away. People who ignored the rules simply didn't stay. They complained about poor sleep. They said the town felt heavy. Oppressive. Like being watched without ever seeing who was doing the watching. They left quietly. And the town didn't stop them. Those who stayed learned something important. The habit wasn't meant to stop something from happening. It was meant to acknowledge something that already was. The watchers didn't need darkness to exist. They didn't need houses to be unlocked. They didn't need invitations. They existed whether people noticed them or not. What mattered was recognition. On some nights, when Mark lay awake just after sunset, he could feel the presence move through the town. Not like footsteps. Like pressure shifting. Passing by one house, then the next. Pausing briefly. Then continuing. He never looked. He never needed to. He realized something then, something that explained why the town never changed. The watchers weren't curious anymore. They weren't learning. They were maintaining. The town was stable. Predictable. Cooperative. And as long as it remained that way, nothing else was required. Once, years later, a storm knocked out power across the entire town. Streetlights went dark. Houses lost electricity. Phones stopped charging. The sun had already set. People lit candles. Not near windows. Not near doors. They sat quietly, waiting. Nothing happened. The next morning, power was restored. Life resumed. The habit continued. That was when Mark finally understood the truth. The town wasn't trapped. It was chosen. Long ago, long before anyone remembered, someone had tested the boundary. Someone had stayed outside too late. Someone had tried to understand instead of accept. And whatever followed had taught the town a lesson that didn't need to be repeated. No monuments marked it. No stories preserved it clearly. Because memory worked better than history. People who grew up in the town carried the habit with them even after they left. They locked doors earlier than necessary. Closed curtains before dark. Felt uneasy when standing near windows at night. They couldn't explain why. Their bodies remembered what their minds no longer needed to. Visitors still came. They still said the town felt peaceful. Still commented on how quiet it was. And if they stayed long enough, they noticed the doors. The locks. The timing. Some laughed. Some asked questions. Some felt the shift in the air just before sunset and decided to leave early. Those were the ones who understood instinctively. Because the town never trapped anyone. It never had to. It only asked for one thing in return. Respect the boundary. Be inside before dark. Do not make yourself visible when the light fades. On rare evenings, when the sunset stretched long and golden and the town remained open a few minutes longer than usual, Mark sometimes wondered what would happen if the habit was broken completely. If one night, no one locked their doors. If no curtains were drawn. If the town stayed visible. Available. He never tested it. No one did. Because the habit wasn't enforced by fear anymore. It was enforced by understanding. The town never changed. And because it didn't. Everything else stayed exactly where it was supposed to be. Waiting.
Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Terramouth.